Hi everyone. My name is Kübra Zengin, and I'm the North America Regional Lead for Google Developer Groups and Women Tech Makers programs at Google. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the Elevate with Google Developers. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat so that way we can just know where you are joining from. And while you are doing that, I would like to kick it off with an introduction for those who don't know what Elevate is for the first comers. So Elevate with Google Developers is a full-year applied skills program that we are hosting great speakers on a monthly basis on the themes of how to transition to a new career, how to grow your career, and then how to grow yourself as a professional. Within those themes, we touch on the communication skills, leadership skills, negotiation, and so on. Today, actually, we have an exciting topic with our great speakers that you will be just learning from. So you can check out the website for more information on the schedule and topics specifically. With every session, you can incorporate your learnings to your professional career and take it to the next level. So with these workshops and presentations that we are having throughout the year, we are thrilled that you could just join us for all of the sessions moving forward. And you can actually watch the previous recordings still on our YouTube channel. We hope all you benefit from the content that we are putting here. So most importantly, housekeeping for today. As this is a great guideline for all of our events, I would like to remind you, all of you, that let's be excellent to each other. So to that extent, please follow all the community guidelines on our website, all the links that we share on the screen. Secondly, add your questions to the chat, on the comment section. So we will have a Q&A session after the presentation, but you can start putting your questions even while the speaker is presenting. So that way we can just pile them up and then ask one by one. And lastly, we are here to help with your with your questions. If you have any concerns or comments or feedback, please share with us at elevate-team@google.com. All right, let's get it started. Today's session will start with a presentation followed by a Q&A session, like I said, and you can ask your questions during the presentation. And then we are going to address all the questions one by one in a timely manner. If you're not able to answer all of them, we will ask our speakers kindly that if they can just, put the comments on the section, and then that way, you can just get them answered. Now, it's time to announce our first speakers. So we have two amazing speakers today. The first one is Terrence Taylor, who is the talent and organizational development consultant at Google, and he will be highlighting practices and approaches to better understand and better manage conflicts. So about handling difficult conversations. And with that said, I will introduce again, welcome Terrence here.
Okay, thank you so much, Huber. I hope everyone can hear me okay and see me okay. I'm really pleased to be spending this hour with you to talk about handling difficult conversations. It gives me an opportunity to share with you some thoughts and some experiences when it comes to this topic, but more importantly, to also give you a chance to share with each other your experiences and your thoughts when it comes to handling difficult conversations. The way I've framed it is to give us a sense of what are practices to help us manage two types of conflict, destructive and then constructive conflicts. So let's get into the slides and into the conversation. So there we go. Okay, so when it comes to this notion of practices to manage destructive and constructive conflict, there are different types of conflict, and it might be interesting for you to note that sometimes we are likely to encounter personal conflict, and sometimes we're likely to encounter professional conflict. And it would be really good for us to share with each other any tips or techniques that work, or even to point out the things that we believe don't necessarily work so well. I thought it would be good to start off with a definition to put us all on the same page about what we're talking about. So you can read faster than I can talk, but with your permission, I will still read this for you so we're all on the same page. Conflict occurs when people disagree or have differing views on topics in the workplace. Destructive conflict hinders work performance because people refuse to speak to each other or don't have civilized conversations. Conflict may also come from personality clashes. Constructive conflict embraces differing ideas and worldviews in an effort to move the company towards its goals and mission. So this is from the smallbusinesscron.com, differences between destructive and constructive conflict. In sharing this with you, I'm also sharing a point of view that it's important for us to know that there are conflicts that actually can be constructive. Okay, let's see. Hold on, I'm getting some updates on how to move forward with my slides. Make sure. Okay. Just a technical challenge there. Let me just check something quickly with my slides. Okay, so I'm having technical challenges with the slides. So I'm going to do something different. Yes, Kubra?
Should we just maybe share the slides from our side so we can just...
Yeah, maybe that'd be helpful.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
why don't we do
let's
that? Okay, so we'll just give you a second to do that.
Okay.
Apologies for that.
All right.
And if it's helpful, I was on slide 4.
All right, just now I think we are working on it.
Okay.
And yeah, it's exciting actually. This conversation is so good, and feel free to ask your questions on the chat. Even now, like if you are having, like a struggle from in the first place with conflicts at work, at in your personal careers and stuff. So let's see if we are able to have the slides ready.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Something's happening.
Nice.
Yay.
You indicated
Kubra to the rescue. Thank you so much, Kubra. This is really good. So, Kubra, can you go to the next slide? Let's see. Or whoever's helping us now. Yeah, perfect. So this is the one that I was on. So it's really an eye-opener for people to realize that there are different types of conflict, and that there are conflicts that we can consider to be constructive, right? Because most times when we battle with handling difficult conversations is because we believe, even if we don't express it, that conflict is actually quite negative and therefore should be avoided at all costs. But sometimes some conflict can be quite constructive. So what do I mean by that? And we use the term productive to describe these conflicts. If we're having conflicts about ideas, conflicts where we're calling each other to order because we have a set of shared values and we feel that someone somehow is violating that set of shared value, conflict around what is best for the business or our clients, these can be quite productive in the sense that it allows us to take a step back and jointly explore what actually is best. Destructive conflict are the ones that we tend to shy away from the most because we realize that in those moments, it seems to have become a conflict that is personal. So it's now about a person, maybe the person's philosophy, maybe the way the person engages with us, perhaps the way the person speaks seems to cause issues for us or other people. When conflict is at that level, it's quite personal, and that can be quite destructive. So what we would like to do is to explore what we can actually do to recognize when we're having more constructive conflict. So the conflicts about ideas, conflicts about the issues or how we can serve our clients and stakeholders better, conflicts around values and maybe people violating the shared values that we have, versus when we're having more destructive conflict, personal issues, the styles that people have that may rub us the wrong way, and the personality clashes. Yeah. So can we go to the next slide? So what I would love to have you spend a few moments reflecting on, and then I'm happy to also share my thoughts on this, is in your experience, what causes the two types of conflict? So what types of things tend to cause destructive conflict? And then what types of things tend to cause constructive conflict? So if you take a moment and just capture for yourself if you have something to write on, or if not, just think about it. And if you're comfortable sharing in the comment section, that'd be great. And then I'm happy to share. I think I've shared some already, but I'm happy to share some more thoughts on this with you. So let's just take a moment and each person reflect on, in your experience, what causes these two types of conflicts, destructive versus constructive. Okay, so I see Saba, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, says destructive, too strong personalities clash, too much ego. Couldn't agree more. Thank you. Also, Saba, no one is willing to budge for the greater good of the company vision. Thank you for destructive as well. Shruti says constructive, ability to empathize. Thanks, Shruti. Okay, Shruti says destructive, unwillingness to listen and not to be open to different perspectives. Yep. Vento says, you got this. Okay, thank you. Kobojo, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that, or Hobojo, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, says destructive closed-mindedness. Okay, Saba says constructive, being pragmatic, trying to view things from larger perspective. Okay, so thank you for those contributions. There might be more that would come later, but I couldn't agree more with those. And just to add a few more and to echo some of the earlier things I've shared as well. So when we're dealing with destructive conflict, sometimes one of the causes could also be someone has a hidden agenda. When we're dealing with destructive conflict, another source of the conflict could be that we're in a situation where there's a fight for power or some politics going on behind the scenes, some turf battles. So these tend to be drivers that are internal to the individual or individuals that might be bringing the conflict, and we are unable to oftentimes observe this. So when it comes to constructive conflict, additional things that could be driving the constructive conflict is we actually realize that our system is more complex than it needs to be, and that's actually causing issues between different players on the team, for example. It may also be that constructive conflict is being raised or constructive conflict is being caused because the way we, or the resources, sorry, that we have to approach the goals that we're trying to achieve may be insufficient, and that could be at the heart of what's also driving the constructive conflict. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so in your experience, what tends to help us to resolve or to manage conflict? So whether that's the destructive conflict that we've spoken about or the constructive conflict we've spoken about. So take a moment and reflect on this, capture it for yourself in writing, and if you feel comfortable, please feel free to share. And there's a question. Sayali says, will brainstorming be destructive or constructive? Sayali, my sense is if brainstorming is being done the positive way that we tend to imagine it to be done, it should be on the constructive side, because we are sharing ideas in aid of trying to find a solution. We're looking at creative ideas or creative approaches to try to normally do something better or resolve a challenge. Okay, so for those who feel comfortable sharing, I would love to see, what are your thoughts? What helps us to resolve or manage destructive or constructive conflicts? All right. Saba says constructive conflict to have more versatile options. Yeah. Smriti says understanding the person's viewpoint, i.e. putting yourself in their shoes. I think that can help with both destructive and constructive. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Let me share one with you. So as we've highlighted, destructive conflict tends to be quite personal, and it often can feel quite personal. One of the ways that I've seen people resolve destructive conflict is by understanding better each other's value system. Oftentimes we fail to realize that our values are things that we emotionally hold to be important. And if and when we feel that our values, personal values, are being violated or being threatened, it could often lead to reactions that involve our emotions, and sometimes the destructive parts of our emotions, where we're trying to defend or we're trying to one up or show ourselves to be better, right? So it's really helpful if you find yourself in engaging in destructive conflict to try to take a step back and ask yourself, are any of my values at play here? Is there anything that I personally hold and strongly emotionally hold to be important that this situation or this individual or this set of individuals are either threatening or violating? That could be something that would be that's something that can really be useful to have in mind as you try to understand how to resolve destructive conflict. We've also talked about the fact that destructive conflict can sometimes be caused by politics or turf battles and things of that nature. It might also be helpful to take a step back and try to understand what type of politics might be at play and where people's sense of what is in their boundary of ownership or control is somehow being threatened. Yeah. And I see Shruti says, for both kinds of conflict, time-bound brainstorming and documentation of different perspectives is important. Documentation helps people reflect on the discussion later and to reevaluate their stance. Very good point, very valid point. Couldn't agree more. So if we are aware of these dynamics at play, these political dynamics, or this sense of boundaries being either crossed or like stepping on each other's toes, it could also give us then an opportunity to explore jointly what is causing this? Why are these politics at play, and what can we do collectively to ensure that each person that might be in this conflict feels that their boundaries either can be respected or can be jointly redrawn? And if the politics is what's really at play, why is it that the individuals feel necessary to utilize politics to potentially get their way or potentially achieve an objective? When it comes to constructive conflict, what often helps to resolve or manage that conflict is taking a step back and actually taking a step up to the level of looking at the purpose. What is the objective, the overarching objective that we're trying to accomplish that might help us to resolve these conflicts about the values that we share potentially being violated, or this notion that if the ideas that we have on the table are not palatable to everyone, how can we go up one level and think about the purpose? So that gives us the filter through which to evaluate the ideas and see which ones might be more useful. Okay, so let me pause here. I just want to see, are there any burning questions before I continue with the rest of the conversation? And if you do have a burning question, please feel free to put it in the comments. So, it's a comment from Hudson Valley Can Code, constructive, finding a win-win solution. Yes, that is true. That is one of the things that would be really helpful. Okay, any burning questions you have or any comments you want to make before I continue with the rest of the talk on how to handle difficult conversations? Okay, so I see this, you've gone forward with the slide, so I will move forward as well. One of the things that I believe often makes it difficult for us to handle difficult conversations is we are dealing with other people who are wonderful, but have their own set of beliefs and their own set of values. Sometimes some values will be shared with us, but others might be different. And I wonder if we were able to adopt a set of beliefs about those people and about people in general, if that might also be one of the most helpful ways that we can resolve conflict, whether it's constructive or destructive. So I want to sell to you a set of what I call empowering beliefs. And for those who have studied neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP for short, you would recognize these as presuppositions from NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. So the first empowering belief is that there is no failure, there's only feedback. Why would this be empowering if it comes to managing or handling difficult conversations and resolving conflict? Well, oftentimes we find it difficult to imagine making an attempt to deal with something as challenging and as difficult as conflict or a difficult conversation, because we suspect that we may actually fail, like we may not be able to reach that other person, or sometimes we fear that having a conversation and trying to resolve the conflict or to deal with the difficulty would make matters worse, would leave things even worse than they were before. So this belief could be empowering if we realize that in all our interactions, especially if we think about it over a period of time, and most of these conflicts or difficult conversations happen in work relationships or personal relationships that are that we experience over a period of time. So it's not like one interaction and then it's over. If we are willing to think that this particular attempt that we want to make to resolve the conflict is a point in time that allows us to get feedback on what works when it comes to dealing with the difficult conversation or handling the difficult situation or resolving the conflict. And once we are able to take that feedback, we might be in an even better position next time to do better and to handle the conversation better and to resolve the conflict more gracefully. one of the most powerful snippets that I've taken away from one of the most powerful snippets that I have in mind when I think of this empowering belief actually comes from astronomy, and it comes from when the US was trying to send a spacecraft to the moon for the very first time. So the Apollo lunar modules were back in the 60s what the United States was able to use to get to the moon, right? Well, for those of us who believe that there actually was a lunar landing. I know some folks believe that that's not the case, but I tend to be a believer that there was a lunar landing. So it turns out that the Apollo craft that got to the moon was off course 99% of the time. So imagine this. This particular spacecraft was completely off course 99% of the time, yet it was still able to land in the exact spots that it was programmed to land in. Now, how is that possible? Well, what was happening is during the voyage, the spacecraft was sending signals back to mission control at National Aeronautics and Space Administration at NASA. And each time, the information would basically be something like this. That NASA asking the spacecraft, where are you in relation to where you should be? And the spacecraft will more or less send back the information. Here's the coordinates of where I am now. And NASA would say, okay, you're off course, correct by X degrees or whatever the case might be. So over and over, this process was repeated. And finally, it got to where it was going. So I actually asked myself, what if we were willing to think about our interactions in this way, that we're taking feedback about how well we're doing when it comes to handling difficult conversations, or we're taking feedback about how well we're doing in our conflict resolution style or approach. And as we take that feedback, we use it as corrective feedback. We make course changes or course corrections as we need to be even more graceful and more effective at handling difficult situations or resolving conflict. So I offer this as a belief that you could buy, and it would empower you when it comes to handling conflict or difficult conversations. Let's go to the next one. The next belief says that the map is not the territory. I'm curious, as you look at this slide, that image that's on the slide, what would you say that image is? If anyone wants to share on the comments what they believe that image is, I would appreciate it. Okay, so Deepa says Africa, Sosu says Africa map, and Saba says it's the African continent, but yeah, okay. So thank you for sharing those responses. This gives us those three responses, or four now. The fourth one says, from Saba says, I'm pretty sure it's some logo or symbol, okay. So those four responses give us a nice spectrum of how people tend to see this image, right? So some would say, hey, I see a map of Africa. Some would say, I see the continent of Africa. Some would say it's actually the continent of Africa or Africa. I would like to humbly say to you that this is a representation of the continent of Africa. So Sosu, I agree with you, is a map, or it's a version of a map of Africa, right? But a map of Africa is just like a map of any of the countries that we come from, can never actually be the actual thing. The best it can do is to conjure up an image in our mind. It's trying to represent what Africa is. But this map of Africa is not the territory of Africa, right? And if you think about this notion of the map is not the territory, it helps us to begin to appreciate that we, in our minds, have mental maps of how the world works. And we also have mental maps of how to handle difficult conversations. We have mental maps of how to manage conflict or resolve conflict. But those maps are at best representations of what the reality would be when it comes to either the continent of Africa, or in the case of difficult conversations and resolving conflict, what actually is happening. So Oluwaseun, or Seun, if you would allow me to shorten your name, says belief influences what we see. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's so important for us to know that our beliefs often create the maps that we have in our minds of what reality is, whether it's reality of the continent of Africa or the reality of something as abstract as how we approach or resolve conflict. So what I would love for you to realize is whatever map you may have developed over time about how to handle difficult conversations or to resolve conflict, that map can be upgraded through your beliefs to allow you to get much better at handling difficult conversations or resolving conflict, right? So the map you may have in your head is not the territory. Let's go on to the next one. The next empowering belief says, if it's possible in the world, it's possible for me. This one tends to be a difficult sale because normally if I say this, you might immediately start to think about things that are possible in the world, but that you know factually are not possible for you. I've even had people challenge me to say, hey, I would love to run as fast as Usain Bolt, but I can't. So it's possible in the world that he can run that fast, but it's not possible for me. And I would have to concede that there are some limitations to this empowering belief, but the way I'm asking you to use it is not necessarily thinking about physical challenges or things that require you to be physically, or your body to perform physically different from your current capabilities, right? However, when it comes to work-related things or things in our personal relationships where conflict is likely to arise, I do believe this belief can be really helpful. Why? Because what we're saying is, if it's possible that conflict can be resolved successfully, or if it's possible that some people are quite good at handling difficult conversations, then it's also possible for me to be good at resolving conflict or handling difficult conversations. Why or how? Well, why? Because first, it's in the realm of human possibility. Some other human or humans have learned or mastered how to do this. They didn't start off being born knowing exactly how to do this, but over time and experience and practices, they've learned techniques and approaches and tools that help them. So if I am willing to invest time to perhaps engage with them and ask them what they do well, or if I'm willing to invest time in reading more about topic of conflict management, I'm also likely over time to improve how I'm able to handle these difficult conversations, and over time to become much better at resolving conflict. So that's what this belief is selling, is if it's possible in the world, then it surely can be possible for me. Let's go to the next one. This one is a very difficult one to accept, but it can be quite liberating when it comes to especially destructive conflict. The belief says behind every behavior, there's a positive intention. So it's asking us to take a step back when we see behaviors that we find offensive or deeply problematic, and try to understand from the perspective of the person doing the behavior, what positive intention do they have? So, in other words, it's saying we're all human. And even if there are things that we do that may seem to be quite negative or destructive, we might be doing that with some positive intention for ourselves, at least, behind the behavior. There might be a goal that we're trying to achieve. So remember earlier, I said that sometimes when we're looking at destructive conflict, it might be the case that there's some political motivation, right, behind the behaviors that are problematic. Or it might be like turf battles are going on and someone's trying to protect their turf. Well, if we took a step back and allowed the other person to be fully human, we might be able to understand that they are trying to do something positive for themselves, or they might deeply believe that their behavior and the approach that they're taking, despite the conflict that it's causing, is actually going to be the best for the team, the best for the objective, the best for the organization. So if we can try to see the positive intention behind the behavior, then we can begin to engage the individual to see exactly, so to assuming positive intent. If we assume positive intent, we can begin to then seek ways to engage that individual to help them to satisfy their positive intent without necessarily having the consequences of the negative or the negative consequences of their current approach. All right, let's go to the next one. This one says, energy flows where attention goes. And it's a powerful belief because it allows us to focus on the things that can help us to get to constructive conflict and constructive resolution of conflict. So as opposed to focusing on the negative behaviors of individuals or institutions that might be causing or contributing to conflict, we can actually look at what are the positive things that we want in resolving the conflict and focus our attention on then the resolutions or the solutions and the positive outcomes that would come from these resolutions or solutions. It basically says, don't spend your time trying to change something that you consider to be negative by focusing on the negative thing. Invest your time instead on what outcome you want, what positive or constructive or different outcome you want. And because you've decided to put your attention on that, the energy that you have will flow towards that. So you are much more likely then to come up with solutions, come up with possibilities that lead to a better resolution. All right, let's go to the next one. I think this might be the last one. Yes, so this is the last slide. Well, in tech, we tend to love having equations. And I thought it might be good for us to have an algorithm to help us to manage conflict. And what this algorithm says is, let's spend as much time as we can focusing on productive conflict and how to make sure that when there's productive conflict, we're thinking about the solutions that end up benefiting the team, the institution, or the collective. And let's spend less time on personal conflict. If we're able to do that, we're likely to see much better outcomes. So in simple English, productive conflict minus personal conflict would lead us to better outcomes. So let me pause here. I'm exactly at 40 minutes into the presentation. I think now is our opportunity to have a more engaged conversation around what I've shared with you, what we've shared in the chat already. So let's go to the Q&A.
All right. Thank you so much, Terrence. This was amazing. Yeah. We learned a lot from you, actually. And then I'm checking actually the question part. And let's see if we have any questions.
All right.
We had lots of actually comments. I really like that. One question that I have here from Sayali. uh, will brainstorming be destructive or constructive? So this is the first
Yes.
question maybe.
Thanks, Sayali. I did comment on that, but I'm happy to expand on that a bit more now that we have more of the content, right? So brainstorming, as we tend to use it, tends to be a practice where we're collectively looking at solution. You're most welcome, Rodrigo. You're looking at solutions, right? And you have identified a goal or an objective. And now the idea is, hey, what ways can we achieve this? So because of that very assumption that we're trying to combine ideas or look for the best idea to achieve something, brainstorming will tend to be more constructive. Now, if we get into brainstorming where we've set up brainstorming the way everyone understands it and expects it to be, but it turns out that as we're quote unquote brainstorming, someone as playing the role of facilitator has a hidden agenda and they're trying to push a particular point of view and or a particular solution, that could be destructive. But the act of brainstorming itself, the way we understand and use it, tends to be constructive.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
So for elaborating, like on the question. So any questions, please put on the chat section of YouTube, and then I can ask like one question that I have. So
Yeah.
for
Okay.
conflict and then handling difficult situations, let's say with other stakeholders and then like actually other people.
Okay.
So we are all human beings, right, Terrence? And then we
Yes.
have like some emotions building up, like in ourselves. So I'm just curious, how to kind of slow down and then like kind of handle better with your own emotions when you are having a conflict. So do you have any tips and tricks? So I know how to handle, logically, but
Yes.
we are made of, emotions, and then
Yeah.
at the same time, sometimes it's hard to stop yourself, right? Just
Yeah.
and then kind of slow down and then like you react, right? So
Yeah.
how to better deal with that one? I'm just curious.
Kubra, that is such a powerful question because we're all humans, and no matter how well we try to mask our emotions or control our emotions, they're there, right?
Exactly.
So one thing that I've learned to do, and I've seen others do well when it comes to emotions and conflict, is to actually acknowledge your emotions. When you feel them, acknowledge them. And sometimes it might even be helpful in a conversation to admit, I'm actually feeling frustrated right now. The way things are going is making me feel frustrated for this or that reason. Now, the most important thing I find, and I'm trying to teach this to my 13-year-old daughter, Claudina, and 10-year-old son, Gilbert, is acknowledging your emotions, but then composing yourself enough then to choose how you react. So what I say to them, for example, is your emotions are valid. If you're angry, if you're mad, if you're sad, if you're happy, it doesn't have to just be the negative end of the spectrum. Whatever emotions you feel, whether positive or negative, valid. Acknowledge them. Don't try to mask or hide them, especially the negative ones. But once you felt that emotion, then take a step back, compose yourself, and ask yourself, what do I want to achieve in this moment? And then choose how you react. Because oftentimes in conflict, what gets us into bad situation or worse conflict is we feel the negative emotions, we don't control it, we don't acknowledge it, and then we act.
Yes.
So sometimes we lash out, or we withdraw, or we become sarcastic. And you can go through the end of the spectrum to see like all the different things that we might do. And other people are very clever as well, so they can read that something isn't quite right, even if we're not admitting it. But they can see our actions and they can feel the impact of our actions. So acknowledge your emotions, ask yourself what do you want to do instead, and then choose. Ask yourself what do you want to achieve, and then choose a course of action that allows you to achieve something constructive.
Okay, got it. A follow-up question. I know we
Yes.
have actually like other questions coming in, which is
Yes.
perfect.
Yes. Yes.
Follow-up question on this one. Like, even I'm struggling by myself. That's why I'm kind of coming to you, like
Yeah.
asking these questions. So, um, let's say, is it better to handle the conversations on a one-on-one level with your own emotions,
Mm.
or is
Hmm.
it better that like kind of, you don't want to be passive aggressive, right? Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
broader like team or group that you're in, but
Yeah.
at the same time, like acknowledge your emotions. You say, like, is it better to handle in the one-on-one level? What do you think?
Yeah, it really does depend on a few things. So let's say, for example, you're in a team, because at Google we tend to work quite often in teams, and I'm sure a lot of other people also work often in teams. If I'm in a team that's a standing team and we know each other over a period of time and we have a cadence in terms of how often we meet and those types of things, I might feel comfortable raising to the team, hey, this particular situation is leaving me to feel this way. So whatever that emotion is, I'll name it. And then it gives me a chance to address it with my teammates,
Mhm.
right? If it's a like a project team, a tiger team where I don't really know people that well, and perhaps we don't meet that often, it might make more sense, especially if I could identify what precisely is causing me to feel that way, or if the conflict seems to be between me and a particular member or members of the team and not the entire team. It might be more productive for me to find time to talk to that individual or those, however many individuals it might be, like the subgroup of individuals that the issue might specifically be with.
Yeah.
And then, of course, one-on-one can be powerful regardless of if it's a team that I know well or don't know well. But for me, that's how I would gauge whether I wanted to be in the team or not in the team.
Got it. Okay. This is helpful. Thank you. And
You're
then
welcome.
we have two questions. Chaba is asking, how would you handle team members who assume you have bad intentions? For example, during a session, we find a win-win solution.
Mhm.
I'm genuinely happy, and they think I'm being sarcastic.
Okay, I love this question. So, handling them wouldn't be what would come top of mind for me. And so I know English is probably our second and third languages for many of us. But what I mean is, if I'm in a situation where there's a win-win solution, I'm genuinely happy, someone thinks I'm being sarcastic. First question I'm going to ask myself is, am I being sarcastic? Right? Because I'm going to assume that they're reading something, right? And they're reading it validly for them, even if that's not what I intend. What they're receiving is valid for them. So, am I being sarcastic? If I'm not, and I'm genuinely happy, then next thing is, all right, is there a way for me to engage with this person or in this group right now so my intention, right, matches what they're receiving? So I'm intending to communicate that, hey, I'm happy that we've reached this win-win solution. Someone is receiving that I'm being sarcastic, that I'm not happy. What can I do in this moment to communicate my genuine happiness? Even if it's just saying, hey, I realize that you may think that I'm being sarcastic, but I'm not. Like, I'm really, really happy that that this is happening. And I know this sounds a bit hokey if that word translates well across the different languages, meaning it sounds like it's not really genuine. But sometimes in that situation, it might be helpful to actually say, well, since we've reached this win-win solution, I think we should all cheer ourselves, for example. So let's give ourselves a hand. Now, if the person still thinks I'm being sarcastic, then it might be time for a one-on-one conversation. But I'm sure additional comments or gestures to the rest of the team would convince the majority of people, the vast majority, that I'm genuinely happy, for example. So it's a shaba. I would say, or try that.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. Actually,
Mhm.
like most of the people say, like it's you like seeing through your own eyes, right? So it's just
Yeah.
kind of personal experience, who is kind of taking it personally or not. But at the same
Yep.
time, of course, the subtle like language like let's say words will just make it a little bit collaborative, and then make it perceived as, okay, this is not, harmful or like dangerous, like that type of a thing, I guess, will be the situation, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Deepa is asking, how do we approach after a difficult conversation, particularly at work? And sometimes it gets harder being a woman to voice out. Yes, this is an
Yeah.
amazing question.
So it's a really good question. I think I have a perspective. I doubt I have the perspective or the correct perspective about the difficulty of things from the perspective of being a female. Okay, how do we approach a difficult conversation? Or how do we approach colleagues, let's say, after a difficult conversation, especially if we're at work? In most relationships that really matter, I've discovered, and I think we all would have discovered this as well, that if the relationship is real and is genuine, there are going to be difficult moments. I call these banana peels. So we're going to step on these banana peels. Now, after you stepped on the banana peel, the question is, what comes next? And I think this is the gist of Deepa's question. So I've had a misstep, or we've had a difficult conversation, and now we're looking at each other and there's tension. How do we release this tension? I found it's helpful for me, again, to acknowledge, hey, that conversation was difficult, or hey, I messed up here. Now, what I would love is, after we've resolved this, or now that we've resolved this, for us to be able to move forward and move forward even better, even stronger. So I'm committing myself to doing whatever would be required, appropriately, of course, for us to move forward. And I'm asking you to do the same if it's a one-on-one thing. If it's a team thing, we've just gone through a very difficult situation. We've talked about it. Now, how do we move forward? And in that question, you're actually inviting others to share their perspective on the way forward. And even in the one-on-one, you're saying to that individual, like, I would like to move forward. What about you? So you're giving that person also the opportunity. Right? Now, in terms of the fact that it might be difficult to do so as a woman, like I said, I have a perspective. I don't think I have the only perspective, but I wonder if you approach it from the point of view of acknowledging what's happened and acknowledging what it is that you personally want from it and inviting the other person, if that wouldn't take away some of the gender imbalances and assumptions. But again, it's a perspective. I don't know if it's the perspective. So if anyone else wants to weigh in on that aspect of the question, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, thank you. So we have another question from JC. So I once witnessed managers in a team meeting behave destructively and nothing was done afterwards. The meeting became really tense and I didn't want to be there. What do you do, like in these cases, I guess?
Yeah, and JC, I've also had those experiences more often than I would honestly like to admit. It's a really difficult thing at work when you see these things happening, because the immediate thought in my mind is, should I get up and leave? But sometimes there are consequences to doing that. Can I voice out how I feel about this or my displeasure with this? Are there consequences for doing that? Is there anything I can do post the meeting to give feedback, to make it known that, hey, this happened at the time, for whatever reason, I didn't feel comfortable or safe, psychologically safe to say something. But now, after the fact, I do want to register either my displeasure or the fact that I don't think that this is good. And I think as an organization, as a team, we need to handle these situations differently. I've tended to choose the last one. Like, if I'm unable at the time to address it, then finding a way to connect with that manager's manager, for example. And even if it's my manager, if I'm unable to go to my manager, then after the fact, I may feel more comfortable going to my manager's manager. Or if that's going to be too risky, then maybe going to someone who I know is going to influence that manager and sharing with them what I experience and why I'm coming to them for help so that they can help that manager deal with the situation differently. If we had more time, I would actually love to hear what your thoughts are on this, JC.
Nice. Okay, thank you,
Mm-hmm.
Terrence. And then we have a few minutes left, and then I will cover two more questions, I guess,
Okay.
and then we can invite our other speakers. So,
Mm-hmm.
Soso is asking, I feel underappreciated in my work. My employee requires features that can take a week to implement, and but expected in a day or two since he's not a developer. How do I communicate this amicably?
Yeah, it's a great point. I tend to think that data could be helpful in situations like this. So the first time this happens, I'm sure it's deeply frustrating, but you find a way to power through and get it done. But I would actually track, like, okay, the the first time you asked me to do this, it normally takes this. I was able through heroics to get it done, right? Here was the impact on the rest of my week or even my health for that matter, if it's appropriate and you feel comfortable discussing that. Like I didn't sleep as much and I didn't feel as productive, for example. Second time it happens, also track that. Like, so now there's a track record that's coming up that's showing the data of like, you normally make these types of requests and I then go through heroics or this is how I actually get it done, but it should take this long. But then here's a knock-on effect. And if you're able to at least have that conversation using that type of data, so whether you've been tracking it or at least you can conversationally bring it up, I think that would be at least a helpful beginning to begin to have the difficult conversation of, okay, what do we do? Because it looks like the lead time is not enough. Like if you need it done in a day or two, but it takes a week to get done, how can I help or how can we jointly together find a way that you get the information to me sooner so I have the time to do it properly without these knock-on effects?
Mm-hmm.
I would try that.
Yeah,
And
planning.
then
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
the last thing I just wanted to address directly, the feeling of being underappreciated. It might be difficult to voice that, but again, remember acknowledging your emotions. When you give me projects that take a week to do, but you expect me to do it in 2 days, I go through heroics to get it done. The impact is this, and I end up feeling underappreciated. I think it's important for them to also know how it makes you feel. Sorry, you wanted to say something, Cooper.
No, I was just going to amplify what you said. Like planning and tracking is the most important thing to just, highlight what progress you are making so that way they understand it. Like if you have any documents, for example, right? Like or bugs or like any feature requests, like about that one. So that might be like necessary to just inform any other stakeholders, not only, like your like manager or anyone else, but yeah. So yeah, it's kind of a culture issue too, in my opinion.
Yeah.
At the same time,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you. Okay, so we have one more question. So
Yes.
Rodrigo is asking, considering the idea that every point of oh wait, so okay, sorry, I was kind of confused. Considering the idea that every point of view has a good intention behind it, how to manage conversation in such a moment? I guess the context is like they are having an election in Brazil and then like there's a political, extremes happening right now. So asking about that one, just the context, but I think we can just generalize this one, like, like every point of view. How can we handle
Yeah.
every point of view?
This comes down to something I've learned to call including as opposed to inclusion. This is a belief that says that you are different and you may have a different view, but your view is valid for you to express. That doesn't mean that I agree with your view. That doesn't mean that I think your view is superior, but it also doesn't mean that I have to demonize your view. So if we're having a situation where there's contestation, different views, and sometimes we can get quite emotional about where we have differences of opinion. The idea of behind every behavior, there's a positive intention says, what is it that is making you to argue so passionately about a view that I may find reprehensible? So let me look at what is it that you are trying to communicate, right? So I'm going to use an example, hopefully a brief example, but maybe a bit controversial, about politics and discussions in the U.S. nowadays. It seems to me that it's no longer possible for people to support a person, a leader like a Donald Trump, and someone who doesn't support a leader like Donald Trump, then still be able to have like an amicable discussion. But the idea is, if you support Donald Trump, I personally don't support Donald Trump, but I still want to know, why do you support Donald Trump? What is it that you see in Donald Trump that allows you to believe that he is best for the country and best for whatever it is you're trying to achieve? So I want to know the positive intention behind someone who supports Donald Trump, because I can engage with the individual with conversations then about that intention. So for example, someone might say, I believe globalization is bad and America has suffered because of globalization. And they give me the facts. And then I can have a conversation about those facts, if you will. We don't have to any longer argue about whether Donald Trump is great or not. It's now about, why do they support Donald Trump? I don't know if that's clear, Rodrigo, but something like that.
Yeah, thank you. So it's not related to any person or individual or, company or whatever. It's more so like understanding the individual's
Yes,
perspective, and then
exactly.
being empathetic.
That's it. That's it.
That's the most important part, right? So
That's it.
regardless of the examples, I
Yeah.
guess that's the most important part, even in our personal lives, at
Yep.
work, or and then kind of you can still disagree, but it's just understanding. So I guess the
Yeah.
bottom line is
Yeah. Hey, y'all, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time, and I wish you a very happy Friday or Saturday, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Terrence. Thank you. This was great. And then, again, we are going to have this recording just staying on YouTube. So you can I'm just, telling all the audience they can just watch it later too. So thank you once again, Terrence. And hopefully you enjoy your day too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, now it's time for our next great speaker. So, Elana, who is a care specialist and executive coach at Google, will speak about navigating team dynamics with us. So, she will share how you can navigate and be successful at team dynamics through the framework of understanding oneself, understanding the others, and then as well as adapting and then connecting. So, let's welcome her.
Thank you so much, Kubra. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So I will just let you take the floor.
Okay, and can you hear me okay? I have a fan going in the background, and because it's very, very hot, but if it's too loud, I can turn it off.
I think we should be okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much. And actually, I caught the tail end of the previous session and saw my friend Terrence, which was great to see, because Terrence and I have worked very closely together. And I want to lend a thank you to him, because he and I have actually worked together on team dynamics. So we partnered on that topic, and he helped inform my thinking on this. And I didn't even realize he was going to be presenting. So that's a nice coincidence. So hello to everyone. I can't see you, but nice to know you're there. And thank you for having me join today. And as Cooper said, I am going to be talking about team dynamics, and I'm going to be talking about it through the lens of theater, which is a little bit of a different spin on team dynamics. I want to acknowledge that, but you'll understand in a moment why I'm sharing it through this lens. So one of my favorite playwrights is Oscar Wilde, who wrote The Importance of Being Earnest and a number of other amazing plays as well as novels. And you'll hear me use some quotes throughout this presentation because I'm a big fan of quotes. So he said, I regard theater as the greatest of all art forms, the most immediate way a human being can share with another the sense of what it is to be a human being. And I love that concept, and that's how I think about theater, and that's also how I think about team dynamics. My love of theater started when I was very young, when I was lucky enough to go to my first Broadway show as a young girl, and I'm a native New Yorker, so I had the privilege of being surrounded by theater in my immediate neighborhood, so to speak. And I studied acting and theater throughout my youth and high school and college. And in fact, in one of my earliest job interviews, I was asked about how I could give examples of being a team player. And I used the experience of being in an ensemble cast as my example, because I wasn't a competitive athlete growing up, and I didn't play competitive sports. And so theater was the next best thing that came to mind. And the idea of working as an ensemble is the same thing really as working as a team. So I truly believe, to use the words of the great bard here, that all the world's a stage, and at every moment we're performing. We're either performing for ourselves or for others. And so I regard theater as a lens through which we can view life and can definitely apply to team dynamics. So as an actor, and we start with Act 1, you need to consider your character. So as an actor, when taking on a role, the first thing that one needs to do is to understand the character. What are the character's motivations? What are the character's values, dreams, desires? How does this character move through the world physically, emotionally, mentally? And applying this lens to team dynamics, it's critically important to fully understand one's own character before interacting with the other characters, so to speak, or trying to understand others or other members of the cast in order to deliver an authentic performance. And one of my top values is authenticity. And this applies in both my personal life and my professional life. And if I'm not being authentic to who I am, then my performance will suffer. And I need to understand my own character in order to be authentic. So just really highlighting this point of understanding one's own character first as a key step to successful team dynamics. An interesting insight is, although 95% of people think that they are self-aware, only 10 to 15% actually are. And so this is why it's really important to engage in exercises that include self-reflection and introspection, as well as seeking out feedback from others. And that feedback can be from, and perspective can be from coaches, from mentors, from peers, from managers. Going through a 360 feedback exercise of sorts, or a 360 assessment is useful in order for you to account for any blind spots that you might not know or be aware of. And this is very much part of my role as an executive coach, is helping people to become more self-aware and offering them a different perspective. So I've included some tools here, and these are tools that I've used, that I've studied. I don't have any particular allegiance to these, other than I think each one has its own value, and you can Google these. They're all accessible on the internet. The first one is the Myers-Briggs type inventory. This has come with a little controversy, I know, that's out there around Myers-Briggs and the validity of it. But I actually think it's quite enlightening. And so I wanted to mention it, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The next one is Clifton Strengths, or you may have heard of this as Strengths Finder, which really believes that you need to know your strengths in order to perform well. And so knowing those strengths really helps you to be more successful. And then there are just some others I included there. The Leadership Circle is like a 360 type assessment. Insights Discovery is another psychometric tool that is closely related to Myers-Briggs. And then there's something called the 5 Voices Assessment, which allows you to identify your leadership voice. And there are many, many more tools. And so welcome you to explore on your own. And I'll talk a little bit later about how these self-reflection tools play a part in overall team dynamics. So the process of understanding oneself can be thought of as self-mastery. And self-mastery, I want to underscore, is not easy. It's a lifelong journey. And there is this great quote that I love here from Lao Tzu, who said that mastering others is a strength, but mastering oneself is true power. So it really is a lifelong exercise. And another way that you can think about self-mastery is self-leadership. And self-leadership can be broken down into 4 main areas, which are emotion management, self-determination, self-awareness, and self-discipline. And so just to go into each of these a little bit more, emotion management is basically your ability to regulate your emotions to match the situation at hand. And I think, in fact, Terrence may have been talking about this a little bit in his presentation, even though I only caught the tail end. Self-determination is about working with a high degree of self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is a belief that you have the capacity to execute the behaviors that you need to in order to perform. Self-awareness is about understanding how your behavior affects others, and also about how it affects your performance. And then self-discipline means resisting temptation in order to stay on track with your goals. So out of these 4 areas, potentially the most important one is self-awareness, which is really a linchpin or a key to opening up more doors for you. And Daniel Goleman, who is a psychologist who published research on emotional intelligence, wrote a quote here: "Self-awareness is the source for understanding one's strengths, weaknesses, attitudes, and relationships toward others." And self-awareness is one of the key components of emotional intelligence. The other components of emotional intelligence are self-regulation, which is the ability to control one's own actions. Motivation to achieve is another one. Empathy, or the ability to understand and care about others' circumstances. And social skill, the ability to find common ground and develop relationships. So you'll notice that there's this bridge from starting to understand yourself more deeply towards then understanding others. And being self-aware means being able to articulate your strengths and your areas of development, and knowing these will actually help you, not just in team dynamics, but they're going to help you define your career goals and your career choices. And Martin Seligman, who is the director of positive psychology at Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania, which is my alma mater, he was my Psych 101 professor. He's widely known in the field of psychology. And he talks about this concept of signature strengths and how these are character strengths that you feel are essential to who you are. And those strengths are going to be the spots where you do best and the spots where you feel yourself flourishing the most. And in fact, he encourages you to, once you identify your signature strengths, to use one of your top strengths in a new and different way every day for about a week. And you'll notice that as your use of these strengths go up, so too goes up your job satisfaction and your productivity. And the more and more signature strengths that you can use, the more likely it is that you'll call your job not a job, but more of a calling. And so if you want to find a job that's more of a calling, it might be finding ways to use multiple or many of your signature strengths at once. So that brings us to Act 2, embrace the ensemble, which is once you've gained a higher sense of self-awareness, which again is an ongoing journey, then you can begin to get to know your cast members. And in order to stage a successful theatrical production, each member of the cast has to work together to form a cohesive ensemble, otherwise thought of as a team. And knowing each other's strengths and weaknesses is key to delivering a great performance. So the cast needs to understand who can really belt, and who's fantastic at tap dancing, and who may be more forgetful with their lines, and being aware of that. The same sentiment can be applied with an orchestra. If any of you are musicians out there, there's another quote that says, "No one can whistle a symphony alone," right? It takes an orchestra to play it. So it takes the brass section and the strings section and the conductor and every instrument in the orchestra in order to play the music the way it should be played. So even if cast members don't get along or run into interpersonal issues, which can happen a lot in a theatrical production, the overarching goal that they share of putting on a great show can unite them. And that can be thought of as a team mission, if you will, right? What is the mission of the team? What is the overarching purpose that we're working towards? It's important to understand what we mean by when we think about a team, right? Or an ensemble. So to put some more definition around it, there's a difference between a team and a work group. A work group is characterized by the least amount of interdependence. So they're usually based on organizational or management hierarchy. And work groups usually meet periodically to share information. And the structure may feel more forced, if you will. Teams, on the other hand, are highly interdependent. So they plan and work together, solve problems together, make decisions together, and review progress in service of a specific project or goal or mission. And team members need one another to get work done. So there was a research study at Google, actually, called Project Aristotle. And this is all public. You can find it on a site called Rework. And the study was conducted to understand what drives team effectiveness. And it was conducted using both quantitative and qualitative data, including interviews with Googlers and surveying teams, et cetera. And the researchers who ran Project Aristotle found that what really mattered was less about who is on the team and more about how the team worked together, essentially the dynamics. So the quality of one's relationship with one's teammates or cast members can have an enormous impact on performance, on engagement, and innovation. And the study found that when teams can trust one another and allow for questioning or risk-taking and mistakes, which also happen all the time in theater, that they perform better. And that concept is called psychological safety, which you may have heard about. So this just shows you a little bit more about this team effectiveness study. And the study showed that there are 5 key dynamics that set successful teams apart from other teams. The first is psychological safety, which is that team members feel safe to take risks and to be vulnerable in front of each other. The second is dependability, which is about, can we take risks on this team? Can we count on each other to do high quality work? Can we rely on each other? The third is structure and clarity, and that's about our goals, roles, and execution plans. Are they clear? Are those plans on our team clear? The fourth is meaning. Are we working on something that's personally important for each of us? And the last one is impact. Do we fundamentally believe that the work that we're doing matters, right? What impact are we having? And so for effective teams, here's what each of these levels sounds like. For psychological safety, it might sound like, if I make a mistake on our team, then it's not held against me. For dependability, it sounds like when my teammates say they'll do something, they follow through with it. For structure and clarity, it's our team has an effective decision-making process. For meaning, the work that I do is meaningful for me. And for impact, I understand how our team's work contributes to the organization's goals. And there's a scientist, an organizational behavioral scientist named Amy Edmondson at Harvard, and she first introduced this concept of team psychological safety. And she defined it as a shared belief by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. And it's a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas or questions or differing perspectives or mistakes. And another way you can think about psychological safety is letting up on the brakes, because it frees people to engage and not be afraid of each other. Of the these five dynamics that the researchers identified, psychological safety was by far the most important. And it's actually critical as a foundation to team effectiveness. So I love this quote from U.S. women's national soccer team player Abby Wambach, if there are any soccer fans out there, because it highlights the second dynamic of team effectiveness, which is dependability, and the importance of relying on each other. So she says, I've never scored a goal in my life without getting a pass from someone else. In a theatrical production, you need to rely on cues from fellow actors so that the performance is successful, and everyone needs to do their part to make the performance successful. Otherwise, you're just an actor on a stage delivering a monologue, right? You need other actors, you need the other cast members to feed you the cues, so to speak. So putting it all together in Act 3 here, once you have a strong sense of self-awareness and you have a good understanding maybe of your teammates, a better understanding of your teammates and why they operate the way they do, you can then adapt your behavior to serve the larger interests of the team, and you can contribute to more effective team dynamics. But as discussed, before you align your behavior to support the bigger mission of the team, you have to know your own preferences first, right? You have to have a good understanding of your own wants and desires. And only then can you appreciate the preferences of others and fine-tune your behavior accordingly. So let me explain what I mean by preferences. Even though I can't see you, I'm going to ask you, wherever you're sitting, wherever you are, to just fold your arms. And I want you to look down and notice which arm is on top. So maybe your left arm is on top, maybe your right arm is on top. And now I want you to fold your arms the other way. See, I can't even do it. And so fold your arms the other way, put the other one on top, and just notice how it feels. And so that's what I mean when I talk about preference, right? for most people, when you try and fold your arms in the opposite way, this can feel a little bit awkward and uncomfortable, but you can do it. You're able to do it. If you're left in that position for a little while, at some point, you'll probably flip your arms back to the original position that they were in because you're more comfortable and it's your preference. And so this is linked to the idea of psychological preferences, where we have a habitual way of responding, right? If we're asked to do things differently, we're able to do so with conscious effort, but it doesn't always feel comfortable, and it requires conscious effort. And in time, without continuous conscious effort, we go back to our usual preferences. So the person who introduced this idea of preferences was Dr. Carl Jung, who's a Swiss psychologist and one of the 20th century's greatest psychologists. And he was very interested in our nature. And he believed that we all have what are called innate preferences. How we are oriented to our environment, in other words, attitude, how we make decisions, and how we interpret information, or our perceiving functions, how we view the world. And how we're oriented to our environment breaks down into two categories, or attitude breaks down into two categories: introversion and extroversion. Introversion is a more internal preference through observation and reflection, and extroversion is more of an external preference through engagement, involvement, and taking action. That doesn't mean that people who are introverted or who have a preference for introversion don't take action. It's just that they have more of a preference to be inwardly reflective. It's really important to emphasize that these preferences fall on a continuum. So typically people will fall somewhere along that continuum, and it's not necessarily an either or choice. You can be farther along the continuum towards one side and have a very strong preference, but you actually contain both. For decision-making functions, that breaks down into thinking versus feeling. So some people have a preference for making decisions with our heads, using analysis and logic and rationale. Other people have a preference for making decisions with our hearts, where we may decide on what something is worth using our personal values, right? Or may think about a decision in terms of people first versus logic first. And again, those are on a continuum as well. And then lastly, perceiving functions are how we take in or process information. And that breaks down into sensing and intuition. So someone who has a strong preference for sensing or sensation is someone who uses their 5 senses to process what you see, hear, smell, taste, touch. People who prefer sensation see the world in a very concrete, realistic, practical, and tangible way, and are very grounded in the present. People who have a preference for intuition often see more than meets the eye. So these are the folks who you might think of as having a sixth sense. And people who have a preference for intuition find meaning through interpretation and are very future focused on future possibilities. So the reason why I'm going into all of this is because once you understand your own preferences and where you sit, you can more easily identify the preferences of others. And that's key to achieving positive team dynamics. So by being authentic to who you are and honoring your preferences, and then reaching out towards another person to recognize their preferences, and perhaps adapting to allow room for your individual style, as well as consideration for their style and the greater good. And adjusting your style, I want to emphasize, I'm talking about 5%. So I don't want you to think that you need to go out and change who you are completely. It's not about changing who you are. It's about adjusting or accommodating slightly in order to achieve more effective team dynamics. So an example of this is if you think about being in the car and you're in the car with someone else and you're playing the radio and you like a certain station, right? It's not that you have to change the station or change the kind of music, but it might be that you need to adjust the volume up 5 notches or down 5 notches, depending on who's in the car with you and how loudly they want to hear the music, right? You can still enjoy the music you enjoy, but you might need to play it at a slightly different volume. And that comes from a desire to connect with people. And that's the most important piece, is the desire to connect. And that takes practice. So another way to illustrate this concept is, once again, a quote from Maya Angelou, who said, if you don't like something, change it. And if you can't change it, then change your attitude. So I love this idea because it gets at the fact that you are in control of your behavior and your actions and your emotions. And so you making that adjustment can ultimately contribute to the greater good or greater team dynamics. Or there's a quote from psychologist Harriet Lerner who said, only through our connectedness to others can we really know and enhance the self. And only through working on the self can we begin to enhance our connectedness to others. Another great example of this is I have a daughter who is now going off to college, but when she went to sleepaway camp in middle school years, they had a camp saying called Pace Your Face. And PACE stood for Positive Attitude Changes Everything. So it was all about, you may be going through a difficult time, but you have to think about you have to think about yourself during that time, and you also have to think about the impact on others. So how can you both honor your own needs and honor those of others? So I'll leave you with basically like a 4-step model for how to think about this, actually, before I go to the tools and resources. And the 4-step model is explore more and discover more about yourself as the first key step. That opens up everything else. Once you do that, you can learn how to recognize and appreciate others' differences, or how they're different from you, and how their preferences might be different from yours. Then you need to learn how to adapt your behavior in order to interact more effectively with others and with the larger team. And then 4th, take action and put your learning into practice. And test it out, experiment, see what works. Different teams will use different methods to diagnose maybe how effective their team dynamics are. There's lots of exercises that can be done. But that 4-step process, right, as Kubra said at the beginning, understanding others, adapting your behavior, and then testing it out and putting it into practice. So finally, there are some tools and resources that I'll just leave you with here. These are some of the things I mentioned earlier on in terms of the assessments. There are also a few articles here about high-performing teams, a couple of books on here that come from thinkers that I really respect and admire. One of them is Emotional Agility by Susan David, Think Again by Adam Grant, who's a professor at Wharton, Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. So there's just kind of an assortment here if you're interested in the topic to dig deeper. And so I'll just end with a thank you, and appreciate your spending the time with me, and happy to answer questions at this point.
All right, I'm back, and then it's time for Q&A. So yeah, let's see if we have any questions in the section. So I'm just checking one by one. So one person just said, oh goodness, I wish this series was offered at my last job, especially these 2 topics. I love the comments. So this is amazing. Yeah. Thank you, Elana. And then Terrence, of course, for making this awesome, presentation, and then we are like helping people actually just level up in their career. So this is amazing. So any questions, please add into the comment section. So I am wanting to actually ask like maybe another question from my side. So team dynamics, right? So we talked about like lots of actually like understanding the team dynamics and how do we, like how do we feel safe and then just kind of vulnerable at the same time, like when we start working in the job. So um I feel like it's hard to set up that culture, Elana, right? So like it's not like you can tell, okay, here's the culture and then you just follow this one. How do you see, like to, let's say, uh provide that like safety in the team, not like, like in a documentation or something? Like how does that come from? Is it because you hire the right people? Is it because, like you just behave like that in the first place and then the others can copy you? Like how that starts, how does that start in the first place? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so a couple of ways. One is sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes there's a great manager of the team who can role model what that safety looks like or can set a safe tone for the team. That helps a lot, but it's not always the case. Honestly, it sometimes comes through experimentation. So there's another model, it's called the Tuckman model for team effectiveness, which is forming, norming, storming, performing, I believe. And in that model, right, the team forms at first, just as you said, and then there's what's called storming, where through trial and error and some experimentation and even like verbal contracting of setting up team behaviors. What are the kind of behaviors we want to demonstrate on this team? Doing that early on in the life of a team, right? Like, let's honor hearing multiple perspectives. Let's work towards not interrupting or talking over one another. Let's think about a yes and mindset when you hear something and building on each other's words. Let's aim to be curious about one another as humans and not just professionals, right? Experimenting with some even like get to know you kind of activities so that the team members can begin to understand what makes people tick when they're outside of the work environment in their own homes and what their values are and what matters to them. And even finding points of both commonality and points of difference. And so it takes time. And that's why the Tuckman model is forming, storming, norming, performing, because you have to go through each of those stages until you can get to the point where you are performing as a team. And you may be in that storming phase for a little while, but the good news is you then get to a place where you're norming and you understand the norms of how the team is supposed to operate, and then can begin to thrive. So it doesn't always happen right off the bat, but it takes a little time. Yeah,
definitely. Follow-up question on that one. Like, how do you think, like the work from home situation changed that one? Like, it's like office culture is kind of, really important, especially at Google too, as we know it. So, and in other companies too, but how do you see that is right now different from the previous structure that we had?
Yes. Yeah. Great question. And I'm experiencing it myself with my team. And my team actually is truly global because my manager sits in California. Yeah. One of my colleagues is in Singapore. One of my colleagues is in London, and I'm in New York. And so just from a time zone standpoint, we have to make extra effort and be really thoughtful about rotating, right? Like even our team meetings, we try and rotate them to be at times that are inconvenient for everyone instead of one person always having to be on late at night.
Yeah.
So in a virtual environment, when you don't have those naturally occurring opportunities to bump into one another or to be sitting next to each other, it means taking extra pains to think of opportunities to connect as a team. And I've heard some teams using like virtual lunches where, and again, this is challenging with time zones, but trying to come together at a time of day where you're all on and you're all just working, but you're in the room with each other, almost working side by side, but on screen, right? Like computer lab hours where you're all just in the room together and working side by side. Whether it's planning fun activities, my team engaged in a songwriting activity where it was facilitated by an external vendor, but we all created a song together. Finding whether it's like escape the room, there are different ways, even virtually, of engaging in team building type activities to just have these more casual interactions where you can begin to see the more human side of each other.
Yeah, definitely. Those are the things we are all, experiencing during this time. So, yeah, even maybe beyond that one, right? It's not like, especially for COVID-19 situation, even beyond that, we are like adapting to change. And then, like this will maybe continue even after COVID is, like gone. So
Yes.
we don't know for sure. We are learning, like to adapting the environment with these type of changes. So it's important to just notice and be aware, like how we can put efforts into the team dynamics much more with these changes too. Any other questions from the audience that I would like to take? Actually, like I don't want to speak here and then ask questions. So let's just wait for a few more minutes for them to ask too. And I'm just kind of curious about more so like the like dependability too. So maybe we can just deep dive into that one. Like we talked about psychological safety and then dependability. Like team members, like you said that get things done on time and meet, like the high bar for excellence, like for each company, not only Google, but like in every company. So but not always it's happening like that, right? So not always is we can stick with the timeline and then like just do our best. Like how do we manage this one, like with some transparency and then like let's say dependability? Like sometimes people are so busy that they forget, or like it's a project management skill for sure, but at the same time, like do you have any tips and tricks, like how we can get the team members depend on each other? So
yeah. So one of my mantras, I guess, is to lead with curiosity. And as an executive coach, that informs my work a great deal, is to be truly curious about others' behavior and why they're behaving a certain way. And so with dependability, for instance, if someone isn't delivering a project on time or there's something interfering with the work getting done, leading with that curiosity as well as the most positive interpretation, right? What's blocking you from getting this done? Or what are some obstacles that are getting in the way of delivering this on time? Or what might be causing a challenge here? Or how can I help ensure that we hit the milestone on this, right? And trying to find out, like trying to be a detective to discern why there is a dependability issue or why there is an obstacle in the way of getting something done on time. The other thing, Kubra, is what I was saying earlier about the preferences, which goes back to some of the tools I mentioned, and this comes up actually in the Myers-Briggs instrument, is we actually each have our own preferences about time, and those can be cultural as well. So some of us are very focused and concerned with meeting deadlines and our planners and feel that showing up on time is critically important. In other cultures or other people, there might be a different way of looking at time, which is more time fluid, right? And more relaxed. And it's not as important about getting something planned out in advance or getting it in on time. It's more about the vision and however long it takes. And so those are some actual innate preferences that we have, and trying to understand what the other person's attitude is towards time can help alleviate or perhaps unlock a conflict. So I would just say, really trying to have that curious mindset and trying to trust that the person has a positive intent, but that the impact might not be showing up the way.
Got it. Yeah. And then I understand, like in the team, I guess people complement each other, like kind of, like like we are complementing each other. You have strengths, of, let's say, delivering the projects on time, and then you have vision, for example, and then you bring them together.
That's
So
exactly
that way it's just moving, you are moving in the right direction. But like at the same time, it can be, frustrating for some people, for sure, like like to see different experiences or like perspectives. But yeah, I think it's just kind of respecting the individual, like just when you are working with the other teammate, and then taking from that one, and then again it comes down to like assume positive intent all the time, right? So it's just that one for sure. Finally, we have one question from Rodrigo. So I'm happy to see one question coming in. Would you be able to share a framework on how to build a good culture on a company that's just starting? Yes, exactly. This is the hardest.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Rodrigo. Thank you. And if I can suggest that a company culture can be thought of almost as just a bigger team, right? So when you think about the team dynamics we talked about and the importance of psychological safety, for example, as a really important foundation for team effectiveness, each of those dynamics we talked about, whether it's that or dependability or meaning, right? You could think about expanding that outwards for a company culture. So as a company, what are we aiming for? What's our mission? What's our goal? Why do we exist? What are we here to do? What are we here to achieve? Who are we here to serve, right? What's the impact that we want to have? How will we ensure that we can depend and rely on one another? Really, most companies do start off by trying to codify a set of values or principles. I worked many years ago at Goldman Sachs, and they had a set of principles that I believe they had codified in the early 1900s. I mean, it was, very soon after the firm was founded. So working together to come up with those principles, I think, is really important. And the beauty of a company that's just starting is usually it's a smaller group of people, right? In a startup. And those early days can be really special because there's a lot of energy and excitement and enthusiasm and belief in the cause and the mission. And there's actual research that says that teams tend to be more effective when they're smaller. So chances are, in a startup company culture, when it's a smaller group of people, it's not as complex to try and create these values and principles because there are just lower numbers of people to do it. So that's what I would say is, perhaps apply that team dynamics model to a company culture, a broader company culture model.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Actually, I have one anecdote on this one. So I'm reading the book of like how Google works. It's
Yes.
just so ironic that I'm working for Google at the same time. Like I'm reading a book on that one, which I already know like how Google works, but at the same time, like there are lots of great things in that book to highlight how Google started in the first place, and then how the culture was set up in such a small like company at the first place, and then just it grew like from the beginning. So there are lots of good examples actually in that book. Like I would recommend like reading that book for sure. And I just wanted to highlight one thing, like two pizza rule. Like they say you need to have like a team which can feed like two, like the team with two pizza. So like
Yes,
it
yes,
should be
yes, that's
like
right.
bigger than that one. So I like the like metaphor over there. So I think that makes sense, like for us to start with the small team and then kind of like make it bigger with the culture that we are kind of trying to what is it, amplify. But yeah, so that book kind of is really explaining how the culture can be set up. So just one recommendation to the audience here too. So we don't have any other questions, I guess. But this was great, like to kind of understand how the team works, and then how the psychology comes in place when it comes to the effective of the team and stuff. So we will actually share the links and then all the recordings with the audience, and then for the ones who missed this session. But Elena, this was amazing. Thank you once again, and then hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend too. So yeah, thank you for making the time with us.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation. It was great to be with you, and wishing everyone a great weekend.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Okay, take care.
Bye. All right. So it's time for a wrap up. And I would like to actually remind a few items for the next sessions, and then also other things that I want to just highlight. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining LOA today. And then hope you all enjoyed both of the sessions. We would like to kindly request from you to fill out the feedback surveys in the email, follow-up emails, and then we are sharing, like on like here on the screen that you can see, so we can improve the program along the way. So you are going to obtain a certificate of the participation since you are joining these sessions for 4 of the sessions in this theme, growing your career. So feel free to make sure that you are filling out the surveys that you missed, and you can rewatch the videos and then complete the surveys afterwards too. So you can use your hashtag, our hashtag Elevate Training, or Elevate with Googlers, with the not Googlers, hashtag Elevate with Google Developers. So on social media to amplify how you like these sessions. We are going to have our next session next month, and we will be giving you more information if you sign up on the website already. And of course, like if you have any questions, please email us at elevate-team@google.com. We are looking forward to seeing you next month. But till then, take care and then stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.